It's Mitzi Mike, and this is the Wave Social Podcast powered by Arcade Studios, a show for marketers, creators, brand builders, and anyone else who's trying to make waves online.
We sit down with the experts and tastemakers behind today's up-and-coming brands. Today on the show, we have Gina Gianatasio Michnowicz, CEO and Chief Creative Officer at the Craftsman Agency.
I'm so glad I didn't have to say that last name. You did so good.
Thank you.
As the CEO and Chief Creative Officer at the Craftsman Agency, Gina focuses on creating magical moments through custom experiential marketing and immersive storytelling for both B2B and B2C brands.
Her past clients have included Cisco, Disney, Paramount, and Microsoft. So we're talking about big projects here. She's led projects from concept to delivery, including immersive digital experiences, experiential installations, websites, and even bespoke advertising campaigns. I think one of the really interesting ones is how they tie in the experiential side.
Yeah, that was really fascinating. I also love that she works with Disney, and she's done a few projects with them, and the task of creating a marketing campaign that shares some of the story but not all of the story to some of the stories we all know and love already. That's really not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, how do you tease something that already has fanfare and familiarity?
Totally.
That's an interesting problem to solve. So I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, it's almost like the art of the trailer. How much of the movie and the story do you give away, and how much of it do you tease? And that's tricky.
Yeah, it's almost, from our conversation, it almost seemed like they have to come up with almost like peripheral storylines and characters and tie-ins that can play in short form content on social, but not spoil the fun of the feature film or whatever it may be.
And I love that Gina says that she really focuses on working with artists. So not just influencers or creators, but people who create art. She even talked about this chocolate train that they did for Godiva, which blew my mind. So she's done some cool projects.
Yeah, a lot of really original stuff that's never been done before, but we won't spoil it. Let's just get straight into the interview.
Let's do it.
Gina, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be good. I think the best way to get this started is just to set the stage with a little bit of your background. So can you take us back to the beginning, whether it's to the beginning of your career or what you studied, or even when you realized you were creative? But yeah, take us back to the beginning.
Yeah. When I realized I was creative, I would say that probably that was very early on from a childhood perspective. So I was always kind of an artist, a dancer, did some plays, and would also do things like create a book or, a children's book, but I was still a child. So I would say that really for much of my life, I was creative. And then interestingly enough, I started my career in HR, and I found that was not bringing out the creativity. And, I was a fashion merchandising major, and so just all of that, I started to crave really being much more creative, and I had the opportunity to jump over into marketing. I will say now that I appreciate my HR experience because it taught me how to consult. So we are very consultative. And then, through a number of years, I really landed into social in the beginning. So we won't talk about how many years ago that was. But to give you some, feel I still remember the Twitter, fail well, kind of miss it still in some ways. So, started working in social in a management consulting firm. And when, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter are basically the only platforms, and MySpace had gone. So that's kind of fast forward. Decided that I wanted to go out on my own because I wanted to pick the clients that I wanted to work with. And I had a lot of great client relationships, but I wanted to work in media and entertainment and, all of that good stuff. And so I just felt like that's going to be such a great place to play with social and advertising and marketing. And so that's been quite a fun journey as well.
So you mentioned HR taught you how to consult. Could you explain that a little bit more? What was it about that function or that industry that gave you that experience?
Yeah, so when I first started, we basically had client groups within. So it's trying to service internal clients is actually harder than servicing clients that pay for you a lot of times, because you're influencing people that don't, there's nothing that they really can take away from you or get, you can give them. I mean, it really is just being able to show value, and being able to understand what value is going to be for that person. And so each client group had a different perspective. Sales had a different perspective. When I was in semiconductors, facilities had a different perspective. I have to say they're one of my favorite client groups, because they always made sure I had the swank office and that the temperature was right.
Nice. That's important. So talk to us about the Craftsman Agency. What kind of work do you specialize in there, and what kind of clients are you working with?
Yeah, so the Craftsman Agency really focuses on making these and creating these magical moments. So we kind of start with a fresh idea, and it blossoms into an integrated campaign. And so it's almost always social led. Our clients tend to be large, global, but we do work with some smaller companies. We like to say it's really about the inventive marketer and the inventive brand, the people that want to tell their story in a different way. And so we really pop up that story in a lot of different ways, be it digital, social, or even in person and experiential. We hope to get more experiential activations again, because that's been a little bit tapered off. So we kind of phrase ourselves as a creative shop that builds experiences no matter what the medium is.
And you had mentioned that you were drawn to media and entertainment, and that's part of why you started the Craftsman Agency. What was it about entertainment specifically that was felt magical and inviting to you?
So, fun fact, back when I was a child, I really wanted to be in film. I mean, that was, I really wanted to act and maybe eventually direct and all of those kinds of things. And so I really wanted to be in the industry, but fast forward, you sort of figure out that that's a very hard industry. I don't think I was willing to wait tables to hold off on my career. And it just really the realization that probably my career was going to be different, which is great and okay. But media and entertainment, this gives me the opportunity to still tell those stories and get those campaigns into market to help support the film. And sometimes you'll have a talent activation, and that's super fun. And it's, it's just, you would think that telling a story when you're basically marketing a story is easy, but it's not, because you don't want to reveal too much. And so it's got this challenge that is different, and they're also first to market. So it helps benefit the tech side of the house, because media and entertainment like to go first to market, and tech likes to be like 10th to market, because they want to make sure it's tried and true, it's proven, and that you have really that expertise, or you've seen that the audience will relate and engage.
Yeah, we were really impressed when we saw the projects that you've worked on, and I'm going to list a few of them here. But it's from Cruella to Lion King to The Greatest Showman. And you mentioned there's a bit of an art to telling a story that's already, or a part of a story that's already in motion, and then how do you not share too much but still get people excited? So what's the balance that you've figured out there, especially when you're dealing with some of these movies that are about to come out? Mm-hmm. How do you strike the balance of let's tease and share some of this but not the full picture?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say Showman was one of those great experiences while the film's been out, for a while. It's still one of my favorites, and it is one of my favorite campaigns still. So it started as an international campaign and turned into global. And so we worked with 4 artists. We called it Haute Circus. That was kind of the pitch idea. It wasn't what we named it ultimately, I think, but we worked with these artists. They were in different mediums, and they just really created a look, and they told part of the story and pulled some of those characters out and some of the essence of the film, and really engaged with their audience, based on sort of their authentic way to show up and tie it to the film. And it was a campaign when organic was still pretty pretty real on Instagram, which is less now. So that was kind of fun because it got really, really great engagement. It was like off the charts. And so that was, that was just a different way to show up and sort of bring, what those kind of characters were going to look like. Lion King was a total kind of flip it on its head. It was for the in-home campaign. And it was, how can you tell the story for Lion King in a bit different way? And so the pitch story was really about, let's do it with food. Let's create food that is, either art form, or maybe it's for, a sort of a watch at home kind of party with your kids. And so there was different angles that we took as part of it. But by far, Jacob's food diary, she's on Instagram. She's amazing. She created Scar, 4,000 grains of rice. And if you can tell me what the eye is, if anybody can tell me what the eye is, I'll send them a DVD. Blu-rays. Honestly, people still do buy Blu-rays, which is, I think, people don't always understand. But she created this piece of art that was really just standout and just showed Scar in a different way and somehow still had his essence.
That's super cool.
I'm curious just to dive into storytelling a little bit, because you say a lot of the work you do is social led, in addition to experiential, but with social specifically, obviously content is so short. And it has a short shelf life as well. So on top of the challenge of not giving away too much from the movie or the broader story itself, how do you find that you tell a story in, 15 or 30 or max 60 seconds in a social asset? Is it the same theory as a longer piece of content, or what's your approach there?
I mean, there's a lot of ways to unpack that. I would say in some ways you start with a larger, longer piece of content, and then you kind of splice it up for social. And I think that when we are thinking about content, a lot of times that is what we're doing, is we're thinking about sort of what is that longer story and how can we have those really pithy sort of bites that you can put into market. And so that tends to be a fairly effective way. If we're dealing with Cruella, for example, we did lean in a lot into creators, and we prefer to work with people that are truly artists and really are creating something. So, while the influencer that takes a selfie with, your product, has always in the past, I think, been really giving you great traction, I think for a lot of reasons, we want to work with somebody that is extending that story, is bringing in maybe new formats, and that can be done also really effectively in a shorter format. And so a great example is designer Daddy, who worked on Cruella, and we worked and leaned into creating a costume from sustainable. And so he created with his daughter a beautiful, beautiful rendition that was sustainable, that used fabrics and toys and different things like that to make the garbage truck costume. And then their video was just fantastic. And it was short, but still told the story.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Cool. How do you come up with campaigns that resonate across generation? Like the example that you just shared sounds really cool, and it sounds like he got to make it with his daughter, and especially with social led content, because platforms are evolving so much, and now with TikTok, which is a whole new audience of people and consumers. How do you kind of come up with campaigns that can kind of bridge all of these platforms, or do you focus on certain platforms based on the project that you have?
So I think it really depends on, the audience that we're dealing with. If you're talking tech all the way to consumer to film. But one of the things that is great from a Disney perspective or a studio that you're working with, any studio, and film, especially if it's a film that's for children, is that you do traverse over generations. And if you think about it, like Pixar and Disney are some of the best in terms of putting in adult humor that goes so far over the child's head. So it is our job as we go into campaigns to think about the different audiences and really tap into that. And so the platform choice is a big, is a big thing that we look at. And we're starting to look at things like BeReal and Discord when you're talking about sort of the tween ages you're trying to tap into. Instagram and TikTok obviously have been, big over the last few years. We've spent much less time focused on Facebook, now Meta. If we're focused on grandmas, we would probably then do more launching on Facebook and Meta, but most of the time that's not the purchaser. So did that answer your question? I'm not sure it totally did.
Totally, yeah. And then I'm curious about experiential.
Experiential.
Like I just had a brain fart.
Yeah.
Like how, I know that you've said that you've kind of scaled back, but you're hoping to scale that up again now that imagine being in a post-COVID world makes that easier. How does that fit into the mix when it comes to coming up with campaigns and content ideas and all that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times you have to really ask. Well, sometimes I ask myself, would I do it? That that is a big question. What's the payoff? But would I do it? It tends to be a good litmus test, because, for instance, there was an activation at an event a while back, and they were putting, it was all about ageism. And I'm a firm believer, age is state of mind, all of those kinds of things. Generational gaps, I think, are getting compressed because the platforms have you all in. And if you manage to be, in sort of a generation that didn't start on TikTok, as long as you're sort of looking and leaning into the entertainment and what that community is all about, it's really about entertainment, then that can traverse over all age groups, right? But this activation had that you were going to put your age on your t-shirt, and it was all about being, proud, and everybody doing and manning the booth were like, there's like 22 and 25 on their t-shirts. And I was like, F no, I'm not going to be doing that. Like, that doesn't even sound interesting to me. So there's that activation. And then it's like, Reddit had a brilliant activation, which is, and we're always looking at, it has to kind of be fast and you have to get a payoff. And then also we want it to have something that is really good enough for somebody to share on social. So those are kind of all of the things that we consider. So you can see socials in the DNA. It's always, we kind of think it's the elixir. Reddit did a really fabulous for the Cannes Lions. They basically had a big board and they had a question every day, and you voted up or down on the question, and it fed into Reddit on the platform. And they had a lot of people, like the numbers, and it showed the numbers of people hitting the ups or downs. And the reality is that is super easy. People were taking pictures of it, so there's that. We lean a lot into art. So muralists, or, we did the chocolate train with 3,000 Godiva chocolate bars. And that was something that got a lot of attention from a social perspective because it was just so beautiful. I mean, the pictures that we have on our website don't even do it justice, but it stands the test of time. And we still show the chocolate train in our capabilities presentations because it does stand the test of time. It's a piece of art. And it just gets people to imagine that you can tell that story in a different way, infuse it with art, and people are going to remember it. And the greatest example is that when we've presented it on multiple occasions, people have been like, oh my God, I was at St. Pancras Station and I saw the train, and I took a picture and I shared it on social, and we're like, but that is exactly what we try to do when we're doing an activation.
Yeah, that's really cool. How do you get a client to sign off on something like a chocolate train? Like, I imagine like the client, like it sounds super cool and really beautiful, but you really do need like that kind of trust from the client to invest in something like that. And I'm sure that's something that you've, strengthened and like built over time. So maybe, do you have any tips on how to get buy-in from clients to do things like that?
Yeah, I would say that trust is, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it really is about trust. We have deep relationships with our clients, and we really do like roll our sleeves up and we're in there. And even if we haven't done it, which by the way, we're trying to do ideas of things that people haven't done. So a lot of times like, oh, do you have that in your capabilities deck? Doesn't really work because we're like, but we've never built a chocolate train, neither has anyone else. So,
right.
It's like, so there are those moments that we just have to, but you don't say, trust us. You just say, here are the reasons and here are the examples of why we think it's going to work and why it's tied to your audience. And we almost always go back to the audience as well. So, we for instance, created a game that was Minute to Fix It. And Minute to Fix It is really telling a story. Kind of was an idea that came out from Minute to Win It. Was they basically were saying you can see where the problem is within your IT infrastructure and fix it in less than a minute. So I was like, we could probably tell that story really effectively because it took probably a half hour to get to that point. And so we did this minute game that basically got to that point really, really quickly. Great way to tell a story. Why did it work for the audience? Because the audience is largely gamers. And they really, they kind of really like that type of activation. So
yeah. Speaking of trust, it looks like you work with a lot of different like cross-functional kinds of client teams. Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned about making those relationships successful? Especially, you mentioned that your relationships are really deep. Like, how do you get there?
Mm-hmm. So, I think showing up with your best self every day certainly makes a big difference. I would say my experience in HR is one of the reasons why we are so effective at cross-functional. Because when you're in HR, you are cross-functional by nature. And so I really learned how to do that very effectively. And so I think that is when we're in large organizations, we are not afraid to work with other agencies within the ecosystem, and large, small, competitive. Obviously, they're competitive, but if we have a piece of the pie and they have a piece of the pie, there's no reason why the campaign won't benefit from all of our collective minds. And Corella was a great example of that. So we really kind of got in there and figured out the mutual objectives. What did PR need? What did publicity need for their activations? What did we need for our activations? How do we connect the dots? And then also, how do we make it really cohesive for that the target consumer? And it was better because we worked with agencies and other groups. And we ended up getting press coverage, which if you're not working with publicity, you're not going to get that press coverage. And so we ended up having cross-pollination on Disney channels, which isn't always done because, the dresses that we did that were made out of chocolate that we sent to press and influencers, those were really great. And so we had behind the scenes and we created, the content for Disney Eats to actually put on their channels. And so that was really from just working. I think it's just kind of being a nice person, is some of it, really understanding the objectives. But that's also why we're really effective with partnerships like Godiva and Fox for the chocolate train is though they definitely had different objectives, but we had to really get in there and understand them so that Godiva could send traffic to the flagship store, and ultimately Fox was going to put, butts in seats for opening weekend.
So you mentioned objectives, which I agree is really crucial to a successful relationship. But what about expectations? Like in the relationship, are you as Craftsman Agency the ones setting the expectations, or are you more so extracting and understanding them and then meeting them?
I think there's always got to be mutual expectations. You know, I mean, there's certainly the SLAs that we have to deliver. But, you know, the client is going to give you a set of expectations, but sometimes the client doesn't know exactly what they need to achieve or what they can achieve with a certain activation. And so a lot of times we are coming together and saying, okay, these are the measurements that you have, but for instance, if you can get me a tracking URL, I can tell you if that influencer is actually driving conversion and product sales. So there's things like that we work together to really figure out what is the right set of metrics based on, you know, what the business is trying to achieve. Mm-hmm.
You talked about like working with multiple agencies, which I know that for maybe some of our listeners, that might be challenging if they're running their own agency. And we have a bit of experience with doing that as well. Are there any other like maybe common challenges or pain points that you've had to kind of work through on some of these bigger projects that may be like lessons you've learned that you could pass along to someone who's interested in doing something similar?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, honestly, from an agency perspective, you know, stay in your swim lane. You've been scoped. You've been scoped a certain, you know, a certain swim lane, and, you know, maybe provide and sort of collaborate, treat it more as a collaboration and a brainstorming kind of, you know, opportunity for the best of the campaign. If you approach it that way, first of all, it makes a big difference. We will tell you that clients have told us over and over again that we do this better than most, and that we actually, I think, have been told that we are the best with very large organizations. And that's because a lot of people go in with a lot of ego. I mean, check your ego at the door. Know that you've got your piece of the pie. If you show up and you make the other agency look good, don't take their ideas ever, and work together for the success of the campaign. The client will notice and it will bode well for you in the future.
Love it. Something you like, we've talked about a few different like movies and projects and things, but you also work with products. I'm a big fan of Youth to the People. How do you apply some of the like storytelling, like thinking to when you work with products, like especially products that have like a consumer base or maybe even our direct to consumer?
Yeah, certainly. So we worked with Youth to the People on some of their rebranding efforts and some of their some of the look that still is being used on the Sephora store. Youth to the People is definitely one of my favorite brands. I mean, if you haven't used it from a skincare perspective, it still is. But we haven't like done any of their, you know, recent sort of activations and things. So I just want to be clear about that.
Totally.
But I would say anytime that we're looking at a product, it's still tech product, consumer product, anything like that. It's like, you know, how can we tell a story? So for instance, if I was going to be doing a story for Youth to the People, it's all vegan, right? And it's got all of these things in it that, so if I did an activation, I probably would be like a chef that used all of the ingredients to create these really fabulous dishes as part of an activation, for instance. That tells a different story. It also really gives people the visual of that is kale that you are putting on your face. And, you know, the reason that it's such a great product is because of some of those natural antioxidants. So it's taking that, it's maybe taking how to break up the product also and maybe create a piece of art out of it, or take the jars and do something sustainable. Working with influencers and creators to, you know, really do behind the scenes, like this is great, like from a makeup perspective, sometimes really cool to bring drag into it and have them do makeup tutorials so that you also get this angle of this highly engaged audience, and also it's inclusive, and that really bodes well for the brand as well. So I would say those are just a couple of examples of, you know, how you can kind of bring the story through. Do you need more examples, or is that good?
I have a follow-up question because you talked about influencers and creators, and earlier you kind of alluded to the fact, which we agree with, that like previously you might have an influencer just kind of like pose with a product or do something simple like that, but now there's many more interesting ways that you can go about partnerships like that. So I'd like to just hear a little bit more from you on your perspective of how working with influencers and creators has changed, whether it's platform based or even just because consumers are interested in other things now. What are you seeing, and what kind of things are you excited about when it comes to creators' involvement in your work?
I mean, I think by and large, creators are largely on TikTok. So I'd say the biggest shift is that the creators that started on Insta are really figuring out and trying to figure out how they're pulling their audience into TikTok. And the ones that are figuring that out are doing well. And I think it's a different kind of creator that is on TikTok. They are entertainers, they are storytellers. And I think if you can traverse over the platform to Insta to TikTok, then, we're probably going to work with you, because that is, that's also an example of, being able to evolve. I think we've always taken the position that you had to have some sort of form of art, be it words or, something to partner with us. And I would say, so that hasn't really changed, but one thing that has also changed is brand safety. So we tend to do our recruitment because we're looking at niche audiences and we want a specific type of creator. But for brands like Disney and Cisco, those creators have got to be like, all of their posts have got to be clean. Mm-hmm. So right. It's when we've worked with like influencer agencies that are providing those sort of selfie type influencers, the problem that we've had is when we go in from a brand safety perspective, it's, you get down the feed, even sometimes just a little while. And that is, that's where we can't have that with the brands we work with. We can't have, sort of that inappropriate content. So, I would say another area that, is attribution. So, while engagement used to be and a metric used to be really important, it's like, but are you actually getting conversion and site traffic and some of those things? So we're starting to see some of that applied as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing this reminded me, you mentioned earlier that you're starting to think about platforms like Discord, which is less surprising, but you mentioned BeReal. Mm-hmm. And we're both on BeReal. We're having fun with it. Lots of our team are. But I feel like it has a sensibility that it's almost like impregnable by brands. And so I'm curious what you're thinking about for BeReal in terms of like partnerships that you're doing or clients that you're working with, and how you would envision that being a area of potential.
So, I mean, I tend to, yes, I think BeReal is, I mean, by its nature is going to be about, being more authentic. And can a brand do that? I absolutely think a brand still could do it. But I haven't really spent enough time to probably be able to, say how it would apply to our clients. I can tell you why I think it's beneficial maybe for my daughter as things are, she's a tween, and as things are, on platforms and things, this kind of gives you that ability to not have everything be so made up, if you will, sort of that Instagram filter. But we typically spend time really figuring out, not too much time, but enough time to figure out, are the numbers large enough? Are we going to be able to activate our audience? Is it true to the platform? So BeReal is one of those ones. It's probably going to have, employees. It might be great for like employee brand ambassador type of things, as we look at from a brand perspective. But I still think that we've got some time to figure out what makes the most sense. And honestly, I want us to have platforms that really stay true to what their original intention was. I mean, I'm just a little bit not loving the feed right now.
Yeah, that's a hot topic.
You're not the only one.
Like all the changes and how it's evolving so much and prioritizing video so much. And people are like, we just want photos. But on that topic, like you talked about, and we talked about the influencers and creators who understand how to evolve and how to take on new platforms like TikTok. And I think a challenge for all marketers is like being able to evolve as well. And like for you as a creative, especially, how have you managed to evolve, and like how is it that you like, how do you approach that? Like, how do you think about it? Because what we, did 5 years ago is obviously completely different than what we're doing now. And that's something that, we're always talking about too, is like making sure that we're always, we say like always in beta, because it feels like nothing, our strategies are never done. And what we did like 6 months ago will be different than what we do, 6 months from now. So yeah, just curious if you had any perspective on that.
Yeah, I love that. Always in beta. It's a little bit like I always say, nobody can be a social media expert. When people use that as a way to talk about themselves, I'm always like, how is that possible? Because it changes like every day, like sometimes by the hour. I think a lot of it is, staying up on trends, being on the platforms, really, spending time there from a social perspective, looking at, what is cultural relevance and what is the beat of society, and how do you infuse that into the brands that you're working with that makes the brand stay on top of what, they, so that they look relevant and they look timely. So a lot of that is just really being, unfortunately, maybe spending a little bit more screen time, consuming a lot of content, being it read, Ad Age, Advertising Week, like a lot of those. I have the Marketing Brew, like I love the Brew series. And so I do use that as kind of my morning read, but reading books, consuming content, seeing movies, I think if you are going to be a marketer and you didn't see Thor, like you have so much that you can use to probably tell other stories from some of these movies that make you look cultural relevant. You can pull in a social post and not take anything from Marvel, because you do not want to do that. But, making it so that it really is, something that is kind of on top of mind and trend.
Yeah. I want to ask a selfish question since I have you.
Okay.
I think we share the desire of wanting to work in entertainment. And I'm curious, like, how did you start, working with some of these clients that you have? And how did, any advice that you could give on that side of like connecting with some of these studios and like building relationships?
Relationships. And relationships beget relationships. So, I mean, it really, I will honestly tell you, be a purveyor of film and content, because studios, be it broadcast or, theatrical, or, in-home and streaming, they like it when you are excited about the content in the film. So, I mean, that is definitely one of the legs up. And then I think if you're really able to bring something to the table that is unique and fresh, that's the hard part, then, that's really one of the ways that you get into. But I wouldn't recommend spec work. Spec work can work. I mean, I've heard of agencies getting into some of the studios with spec work and just sending content, that you rip from the trailer. But that can be risky and take a lot of time. So I'm not really, I would really just use, try to get relationships. So.
While we're talking about advice, one question that we always like to ask every guest before we wrap up the show is, what's the best piece of advice that you've received, whether it's career or mindset or anything just like life related, that you would love to pass on to our listeners?
I would say it has to come from my dad. Drink deeply from the well of humility.
That's good.
Dang. Okay.
He sounds like a wise guy.
Yes.
He is.
That's poetic.
We've got a lot of those Garyisms. My dad was my original mentor, and I would say a lot of my guidance. But I think that no matter how successful you are, giving back to other people and realizing that people helped you get there is something that you should never lose.
Wow.
Well, we're coming up to our last question here. We like to ask all of our guests this question as well. But who is making waves and why? And this could be a brand, it could be a person, it could be a client, like whoever you think is making waves in their own space.
Yeah. So I think I said this on the last one. So maybe I'll eventually get to do a campaign with him, because that is my desire. I'll just put that out there.
Nice.
Ryan Reynolds. He is a great storyteller. He's also, building a competitive agency to many of us, but he tells stories in a really unique way, and he's got such a great sense of humor. And I really think he's making a lot of waves with Aviator Gin and just even Deadpool, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And his agency is doing some pretty cool work. Like I think I watched his David Letterman interview, and he talked about like how he's such a fan of advertising, and it's just so refreshing to hear someone describe it the way he does, but how you can make a little world and talking about product in a creative way. So yeah, I agree with that for sure. Love it. Well, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, where can people find you after this?
I'm on LinkedIn. Please don't tell me how you can sell more for my agency.
Yes.
I get a lot of those. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn under Gina Gianatasio Michnowicz. I am on Instagram, and then there's also the craftsmanagency.com.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for imparting your wisdom and your experience to our listeners. We appreciate it. And I guess it's probably not a long weekend where you are, but it's about to be for us. Either way, enjoy your weekend.
Yeah. No, it's not. But you enjoy your long weekend.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.